You've tuned into The Brew, the talk show that explores queer spirituality, social issues, and pagan culture with me, your host, Dr. John Michael Salvato. Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another installment of The Brew, the talk show for and about queer pagan spirituality and culture. I'm your host, Dr. John Michael Salvato. If you're watching live, welcome. Go ahead and type live in the comments so that we know that you're watching and where you're watching from. Go ahead and let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you're watching on the replay, please go ahead and type replay and let us know where it is that you're watching from as well. Remember to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, as it will be going live on YouTube, I believe at 7 o'clock Eastern Time tonight. And if you're listening to our podcasts, then on iTunes or Spotify, be sure to know that we love and appreciate every one of you guys, especially for those of you that are out there spreading the word about the podcast. We really appreciate your help, guys. I'm excited about our guest this afternoon, who I'm about to bring up on the screen. I don't chew gum and talk very well at the same time, but I've been stalking this guy's profile for about 6 months, maybe 8 months now, because I had a pretty good feeling that he was part of our spiritual fam, and I'm really glad that we were able to schedule some time today to get him on the show. Chiron Armand is the founder of Impact Shamanism. It's a spirit. He's a spirit-initiated shaman holding additional initiations in such New World traditions as Haitian Vodou, Brazilian Quimbanda, and the Unnamed Path. And I probably just completely slaughtered the name of that tradition. I apologize. He's a trained hoodoo root doctor in the Southern Conjure tradition. He's also the author of the book Deliverance, Hoodoo Spells of Uncrossing, Healing, and Protection, and Clearing Spaces. He holds an MA in Performance Studies from New York University, a BA in Ritual Anthropology and Queer Studies from Hampshire College. And my brother, welcome to the show. I know we've had some challenges getting you scheduled in here. And before we begin, did I miss anything that you want to add or misstate anything about your
Oh,
background?
I think it was great.
Perfect. I think you might have just been breaking up a little bit. So one of the things that I always like to do when we get started is to ask our guests to share a little bit about their path, how it evolved, and how they identify today. Because this show, for those that are watching for the first time, is focused and dedicated to queer pagan spirituality and culture. But not all of our guests identify as such. Some are just allies of the community. So tell us a little bit about you, about your background, what led you to this point in the path.
Sure. So I was reading tarot in college and doing a bit of herbalism, a bit of neo-Wiccan solitary practice for myself, looking a lot at queer spirituality, kind of drawing on the gay archetypal psychology movement of the 1970s, just trying to sort of wrap my head around what it meant for me to be queer and the different roles that queer people have played in cultures around the world. And at the time, I was sort of looking at theater and ritual, trying to make sense of how they support each other, how an understanding of ritual can make theater more powerful, and how an understanding of theater can make ritual more transformative. And I ended up graduating into the recession. And at the time, I had been studying the Unnamed Path with the late Eddie Gutierrez. And at the time, I knew that he was starting to practice hoodoo and build his own practice aside from his queer shamanic community work. And I was like, well, let me get a reading with him. And I was like, why can't I find a job? And he was like, you're supposed to be doing this. And I was like, that's insane. And I didn't know what this was, but what I came to understand was, and this is what to me really differentiates the Southern conjure tradition, the hoodoo root work tradition, from many other magical practices is it is a system of diagnosis and prescription to resolve energetic conditions in one's life. And that is why it's so popular, but it's one of the reasons why we must continue to say where it comes from, because it is so unique in that way. And I am really privileged that I was able to study with him, not only in our Unnamed Path tradition, but in this tradition before he passed, so that I could be a part of this world and understand my own abilities in regards to diagnosing and prescribing for conditions, which helped a great deal later on down the line when my work, continuing to be connected to Hoodoo root work, began to take on a bit more of a shamanic flair or flavor. And even I can't exactly pinpoint what about my work is shamanic, except myself and my own experiences with the spirit world.
You know, that's a really, you bring up a good point. For some of our viewers may not be as familiar with the Hoodoo tradition, particularly Southern Hoodoo root work, and its connections, its really deep-rooted connections to the shamanic path. So a lot of, I've talked to some people who think that, you know, root work is really just as I kiddingly say that coming from the Italian folk tradition, where a lot of root work is done. It's definitely folk magic. That becoming a naturopath was just giving me a professional shingle to hang out and do what my grandmother had done for her entire life. But within Hoodoo, as I understand it, the one of the things that makes that particularly special, particularly unique, and I think as a result more effective in a lot of cases, is that you're also working with the spirit of the plants. You're not just saying, okay, here's an herb to take, here's a root that you can use in such and such a way. Talk a little bit about that connection, that relationship, as I understand it, that you develop with the spirit of the thing.
Well, you know, I was so grateful that one of the first things that ever came across my desk was the book Medicine Grove by Lauren Cruden. And anytime a client or potential student comes to me and there's some relationship I see between themselves and the plant world, I always recommend that book. It's a small tome, but it's why I'm so grateful for it is I came across that book before I entered the root work tradition. You know, so many of our magical traditions love a good correspondence list. So, like, for protection, angelic, that and the other, and it's like, okay, but why would I choose one over the other? And it's because each of these has its own perspective on protection. Each of these has its own perspective on the world, and cultivating a real relationship with that plant can teach you so much. So for me, Angelica root, for instance, beloved for protection, is very much like that energy of an angel's wings or a mother. It's a very holding you kind of protection. Whereas for me, basil is a much more warding off kind of protection. It's one of the reasons why we say in Hoodoo, where basil is, evil cannot be. And once you start to cultivate these kinds of relationships, it becomes, I mean, I love a good spell. I love a good talisman. I love to sprinkle some shit or throw some shit in the talisman or throw some shit in the bath. But sometimes it's about, maybe I don't need a spell. Maybe I need to sit with basil for a week and really allow this perspective to really infuse my own perspective and infuse my nature. Maybe I need to fumigate basil as an offering and just carry it with me. Just speak to me, help me to know the part of me better that you know so well in yourself. And this is, I think that's often where I get a little snagged when I'm trying to express to people the vast capacity for relationship when we're not choosing addiction to intensity, which so many of our magical traditions really lead us to, but we're actually choosing intimacy. And not only that, but then when it is time for a spell, then these plants will tell you shit that no one wrote down in a book. You know?
Right on, right on. And that's the perfect segue, you know, guys. I say every week when we have some of these amazing guests like yourself on the show that this show is unscripted. that we kind of let the conversation unfold. And that was the perfect segue into what I wanted to ask you next. We had both Matt Oren and Devin Hunter on the show, and we talked about the intersectionality of the queer experience with the magical path. And you just said something that was like all the lights going off at once for me, because and would you do us the honor, or and you could certainly say no, of talking about how both of those experiences, the intersectionality of those two experiences, helps to inform the other. So how the relationship to hoodoo, and really building on that intimacy rather than that addiction, as you said, to to the drama and intensity. How does that, or has that, informed your relationship and identity as a queer male, and vice versa? Did that
Oh
make any
wow.
sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll get like hella personal. Like, my people as queer men, we're in a lot of pain. We are in a lot of pain. And I had the privilege and to engage in some very, very dangerous ways, frankly, with some of my brothers during some years of my life. And I was privileged enough to be able to sort of like spelunk into the underworld and then be pulled out in a pretty healthy, safe way. But over that time, what I was able to see was how addiction to intensity is getting in the way of our intimacy and with each other and with ourselves. And it was hard and painful. Addiction to intensity, in one of my cosmologies, the heart has four chambers, and one of the chambers is about fullness of love, being able to give and receive love in such a huge way, perfect reciprocity. And when we're not experiencing that perfect reciprocity, we fall into the possibility to addiction to intensity. And here you have this group of people who have been so stigmatized in terms of the way they love, in terms of who they are. And one of the things we say in my Unnamed Path group is that one of the medicines that queer men have is our capacity for love. So here you have this group of people who has this ridiculous capacity for love, being so harshly stigmatized. Of course, we're going to choose addiction to intensity to make up for what we are so naturally supposed to be giving and receiving, but have been cut off from. So it's hard. None of us do this life, this shamanic thing, this witchcraft things. There are truly systemic issues standing in the way of us being able to pull this off 100% as individuals or as communities. But we can recognize how those influence the moment and say, well, in this moment, I'm going to make this choice to speak to what I think is a much greater possibility for my life and all of us.
I I knew that this was going to be one of those really intense and really deep interviews. And guys, I'm mindful of the fact that so many of you have been commenting. I've been trying to put some of the comments on the screen while listening, and I will say right up front that because of how deep you're going, Kai, this it's not been really easy for me to put the comments on the screen because I'm captivated by what you're saying. So guys, if you're watching, and one of the benefits of having terrific guests like Kai on is that we allow you to ask your questions. What I do ask is that you continue to comment as you're doing. I love those comments, and the folks who are watching this rather than listening on the podcast will be able to see all of those comments. And after the show, we usually, the guests and I will usually respond to some of your specific comments. But if you've got questions, keep those relatively short so that I can put them on the screen and we can talk about those. I want to just acknowledge that Marshall McCall said his great grandmother was a root worker as well. I think we've actually talked about that when you were on the show, Marshall. Richard Levy says, I think we need we need emphasis we need to emphasize a spiritual and organic approach over correspondence lists. And yeah, I couldn't say that I agree any more strongly than that. I think I saw you nodding as well, Kai. And as we move on, I want to talk more about your work in shamanic journeying. Because and for folks who are wanting more information, you can go to impactshamanism.com for more information on these things that we're talking about. But tell us a little bit about that work that you bring to to our community, because I think it's something a number of our viewers are going to want to take advantage of. But what is it exactly? And explain a little bit about Michael's roots and how that's informed your practice.
Sure. So my work kind of is at the intersection of a couple of different African diasporic traditions, such as Haitian Vodou and Brazilian Quimbanda, and then Hoodoo root work, which is kind of my primary go-to. Just sort of, I'm a magician. I love to be able to work with, and I come from a Christian background, having grown up evangelical Christian. So I am quick to grab my Bible for bibliomancy. I'm quick to read Psalms aloud as a form of self-anchoring and prayer and protection. My primary magical expression comes through a very folk magic root work background, and it's something that also I think keeps me very grounded and in relationship to culture, because one of the great things about a folk magic is that you find it, the technology is replicated across other folk magics. So everyone's working with water, everyone's working with candle, everyone's grabbing a personal concern, and it's a easily translatable language, and it connects with my understanding of cultures around the world and my ability to engage with so many different kinds of people. And then on the other hand, you also have this really nebulous area that I probably on my website use the term like contemporary shamanism. And what I mean by that is at that place of contemporary shamanism, I'm talking about some of the background that I have working with teachers like Eddie Gutierrez in the Unnamed Path, and some of the shadow work and shamanic journey training I received from him. I trained with the teacher Christina Pratt of the Last Mask community in Oregon. I trained with her for a couple of years. And both of those traditions draw somewhat on Michael Harner's core shamanism, just sort of the understanding or use of shamanic journey work, which is just a kind of trance, just a form of trance for engaging the spirit world. And those things combined with my own sort of that have brought me in direct spiritual connection with the Greek, Celtic, and Norse traditions in a way that is strange, because I haven't had a teacher in any of these traditions. I have simply had the gods go, and in ways that have left me physically ill or mentally ill for long periods of time as I was being rewired. Again, really nebulous area, but all of these trainings and all of these experiences have enabled me to be able to explore someone's life from a really, really wide background. Is what someone is going through a really mundane issue that if we throw some plants at it or candle at it should be fixed? Or is this actually a really, really old past life issue that needs to be resolved? Is the issue that you're, having with love because you were a priestess of Venus in 300 AD and she's still pissed at you because you walked away? And I know that that's so out there and so obtuse, and I know that even me saying that makes certain kinds of magicians really angry, and I want to be angry too. I want things to be a lot simpler. But the thing is that they're not simple at all. This has never happened before. Literally, in all of human history, this kind of human and cultural complexity and dearth of roots and connection has never happened before. And one of the reasons why it's so important for us to value the wide range of modalities that we have access to right now, from naturopathy to acupuncture to someone like me who has his hands in all kinds of pots and is trying to my best to keep my hands clean and maintain these very different things, is because we're all coming from these vastly different cultural backgrounds. And one day I can have someone who's, dealing with a jinn attachment coming from, the Middle East, to someone who's dealing with a past life deity debt, to someone who just needs, a little bit of reconciliation work, some honey on the stove with a sock to bring that man back. All of these are really valuable. All of these approaches are valuable. I'm hoping that in the next few years, more people will be available to, if not necessarily engage in such strange and vast ways, be able to say, well, I'm going to refer you to someone who can. I do a lot in my practice is I refer people. Because I'm not an Orisha practitioner and I'm not a naturopath, but so often, actually in every divination I do, I'm always asking, do I need to refer someone to someone? Because I really value people's time and resources, and I know that I might have some ideas, but I certainly don't have all the answers.
See, that I so appreciate that, because that's what really brought us to doing this show. I mean, there's some fantastic podcasters out there, and even video broadcasters out there who talk about spirituality, who talk about the metaphysical in all of it, and the occult in all of its aspects. And so I didn't want to just be another voice that added to the sort of the cacophony of sound that we're getting in this information age. But I thought by having practitioners like yourself and Devin and Matt and Scarlett and all of these people on, folks are going to and are getting those different perspectives, and it becomes an organic source of referral for those people with whom I don't have that relationship, to even be able to say, hey, I think you need to talk to this person. I think you may be able to do this. So I appreciate that. And another topic that I wanted to talk about today is because we seem to be at a point when there's just a small handful of witches and shamanic practitioners and metaphysicians who are willing to do so, is to talk about the role of social justice and spiritual practice, because I don't need to preach to the choir here with a rabid, self-aggrandizing racist in the Oval Office. We've seen an uptick in a number of mass murders, the attacks on people of color, including just horrific increases in the number of attacks on gender fluid and trans people of color, and an overall depth of racist violence that is causing PTSD among a lot of people, and which feels to me, having worked at the King Center in Atlanta for so many years, this moment feels like what I've heard Representative John Lewis or Shirley Chisholm say it was like in those early days with Dr. King, and it's refreshing, first of all. So I thank you, first of all, for that your voice is among those that's not afraid to make waves, that's not worried about what your publisher or blog company is going to say. In fact, I loved something that I've got a quote here because I thought it was fabulous, on that you had on Facebook and Twitter the other day, where you said, power-hungry male occultist dominating the field, charming us with nonsensical, authoritative diatribes while lacking heart, compassion, empathy, and wisdom. And Christ, if I couldn't have found better words to describe what's so frustrating about social media today, but on a broader picture that's becoming more and more disheartening as I see things that are happening within our metaphysical communities. We talked about queer intersectionality, but let's talk about that intersectionality of the metaphysician, the magician, the root worker, with the call to social justice, especially I think for the root worker, because just the very roots itself of that tradition is rooted in that suffering, in that oppression, in that violence that they've overcome. talk to me a little bit about that.
So many things I can say. On one hand, I can say, part of my own current learning trajectory is I'm very much a healer. I'm very much a heart-centered healer who's always trying to bring reconciliation and connection and peace. And sometimes I had to stop that bullshit, because the bullshit that we're dealing with is so vast and extreme and intense, and we love to collude with it. We love to collude with these heady, egotistical, manipulative fucks. And my own North Node is in Aries. So, and my South Node in Libra, I'm not much of an astrologer, but I had to keep coming back to this to understand, like, why do I keep being put in situations where it feels like my sweet healingness isn't going to be enough, and it feels like, oh no, I'm going to have to fight. And it's because my Aries is in North Node. My North Node is in Aries, and I'm here to actually, like, cut some balls off. It's my South Node Libra that gives me the sweet healy background. But part of the reason why we have to move forward in a kind of like intense way is because they're killing us, and they want to kill us. And then when we want to say, stop killing us, they say, oh, you're saying it so mean, though. Could you say it a little bit nicer? And we're like, no, you're racist and you're transphobic. And you're, oh, those are such harsh words, though. Perhaps I am having a much more heady diatribe that if you chew on this tomorrow, you might. No, stop. And why this is so important for us to look at is because so many of the wars we are fighting, and this is not, me trying to be a sort of hotep new agey person, but just from an element perspective, this is all about the element of air. This is all about the mind. When we're talking, so many articles are coming out about gaslighting, manipulation, egocentrism. All of these have connections to the mind. Propaganda, Trump's speeches, words, all of this is about the element of air. If we really want to understand not only where the what the engine of abuse is behind these intersectional oppressions, but the collusion with that engine of abuse, we need to, in our individual lives and in community, get really good at relationship with the element of air. I was in a relationship with someone who I should not have been in. And I was having dreams over 3 years trying to warn me and trying to help me to understand the deeply psychotic dynamic I was in. And it wasn't until the end of the relationship where I realized that so much of this person's unconscious weaponry against me was the ability to spin me out of my body so that I would give my authority over to them. And you put you in a really insane state. And as I talk to other people who have been in deeply psychologically and emotionally abusive relationships, we all come back to that, like, yeah, it's this experience of being spun out of yourself, a desire to disembody you. Through the element of air, I will take your element of earth. All of this is really simple. Simplicity really matters from a shamanic perspective, because we as humans are really complex and can make things that are really simple more complex. But it's the element of air. It's the element of air. And one of the things that I've been looking at over the past 2 years has been, I've spoken about this in a couple of other podcasts, the concept of Wetiko, which comes to us from the Cree and Anishinaabe people. And a Wetiko is a cannibal. It's a monster in the community who has been fed on themselves, has now turned into someone who feeds on others. And there have been a couple of writers over the past few years, past 30 years really, if we include Jack D. Forbes's Columbus and Other Cannibals. Most recently, the Wetiko Legal Principles was published last year, who have taken this concept of Wetiko and applied it to our culture. And it's like, okay, we live in a Wetiko culture. We live in a culture where we celebrate perverse psychology, where the element of air, as I say, is used to devour others and make the devouring of each other palatable and acceptable. So that's, I guess, where a lot of my social justice leanings are going to. Of course, I'm concerned about the specifics. I myself am a Black, Indigenous shaman who's queer. I'm a very vulnerable, part of a very vulnerable population, many vulnerable populations. But the root I keep seeing is how we keep giving our power over to toxic, heavy men, whether in the occult community, whether in the political arena, to toxic, heady men who want to charm us with words that lead us to accept their sickness or collude with them.
There was a great article that Scarlett Magdalene shared yesterday. I think Matt shared it also. That talks about how the right is using the occult and esoteric communities in order to advance agendas that are not actually parts of our traditions, and how it's precisely that. It's those men, those toxic males who are manipulating and creating. And the more I started to think about it, the more it became resonant with the reason why, growing up in an Italian folk magic tradition, where we were very clear that what happens in our Dionic devotion in the coven itself is the religion that has nothing to do with the folk magic itself, but that some of the people from the folk magic tradition happen to be in the Boschetto, in the Grove, and I should have loved that and embraced it, because I'm a theater person. I love drama. I love production. I love, the smells and bells. It's all great, but there was something that was abrasive, something that forced me, after 24 years of being the high priest in the coven, to walk away. And it wasn't until I read that article last night that really clicked for me, that it was because I was seeing these male influences come in, air influences all, coming in and stirring up shit and pulling people out of the base of their power. And so you articulated that really well today, to take that a little bit further for me. So I thank you. Any books, any tours? I'm mindful that we're going a little bit over. Hopefully you can stay with us a couple more minutes.
Of course.
Any books or tours or workshops on the horizon? I made a note for myself to look at your events page, and I didn't do it because I probably figured it was going to.
Not right now. I'm working on a couple of book proposals, but I am mostly just chilling and traveling and healing. I love engaging the world, but in order to engage in a good way, we've got to step back sometimes. So that's what I've been doing lately.
And how can people get a hold of you?
Oh yeah, so you can email me at info@impactshamanism.com. You can find me on Twitter, find me on Instagram, Chiron Armand. My website is impactshamanism.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in live or watching us on the rebroadcast, listening to the podcast, watching the YouTube broadcast a little bit later on today. You can catch up on all of our shows on the Brew podcast, available at Spotify and iTunes, or on the website down below, inneralchemy.online. Thank you, Chiron Armand, for being our guest today. Richard just jumped in one more second. Let's give him one more second. Education systems are making this tough. Imagine if people learned rhetoric and then listened to politicians. Well said. And there is a topic for another show, Richard. So we might want to go ahead and get you on here to talk about that some more. Chiron, thank you so much for being here. And we want to thank our sponsors for the show that help us keep the lights on, and through inneralchemy.online, and with our new partnership with the mental wellness movement. And so until next time, guys, we encourage you to stay in the moment, to be grateful for what you've got. If you can't be grateful for what you have right now, there is absolutely no reason to be convinced that you're going to be any happier with more. And always remember that the best is yet to come. We'll talk to you all soon.